Okay, welcome to our quarterly investor briefing. Thanks everybody for joining. If you've been on these before, you know they are a half hour, and we will stick to that time. But I think I know most of the people. If I don't know you, Glenn Stevens, Executive Director at MichAuto. And again, what we're trying to do with these is bring you kind of the latest or some thought leadership on what's going on in the market. We're going to get a little bit of both today from one of our strongest partners, and somebody I've known for a long time and I have a lot of respect for. Bernard Swiecki knows this industry, knows the automotive communities, spent a lot of time at the Center for Automotive Research, and now is at the Detroit Regional Partnership, specifically helping lead the GEM initiative, which he's going to tell you about. But Bernard is the Vice President of Mobility and Research at the Detroit Regional Partnership and GEM. And we're really glad to have you here today. If you have a question, put it in the chat, and we might get to it. If not, we'll follow up with you. You will see a slide at the end that has Bernard's full contact information, and we're also going to get a summary of today to you, so you have that. But again, if there's some specific information you're looking for that you see, of course, contact our team, but you will see Bernard's contact information at the end, and we'll make sure that you all have that. So without further ado, and I want to make sure that we have time for Bernard to get through the data and the information. This is a study that the DRP and GEM worked on. Bernard will give you the background on it, but we felt that it was very pivotal when we look at what are the technologies in the mobility sector that are going to drive this industry, drive specifically this region. And again, he'll talk to you about that. And so what we asked him to do is present the FMTS, as GEM and DRP call it. And Bernard, with you, thanks for taking some time today, and we're going to let you dive right in, and we'll turn Command Central over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Fabulous. Excuse me. And Glenn, thank you very much. I want to thank Glenn and the whole DRC and MichAuto team. One, for their totally fabulous partnership with us all along, but also for the chance to speak with all of you here today. And hello and good morning, and thank you for joining us first thing. As Glenn mentioned, this study is part of our work at the Global Epicenter of Mobility, or GEM, which is a program within DRP, or the Detroit Regional Partnership, sponsored by the Economic Development Administration. And I've got a little bit of a background on that for you coming up. But here on the title slide, just a few of our key pillar partners. Our work is divided into 6 different pillars, and those entities on the screen do run those pillars. So just a quick outline for what you're going to be hearing this morning. One is an introduction to GEM. Then we dive right into the study, why we did it and how we did it, then the results, a quick 1-slide conversation about some of the employment and regional impacts. Actually, the employment is more, the region is one, and then time for questions and discussion. And I know we're on a very tight timeline today, so as Glenn mentioned, always available for questions or comments or feedback anytime that you may want to reach out. So first of all, I know a lot of you are familiar with GEM and our work, and I think we've got a few of our pillars on the call here as well. But for those of you who don't, just very quickly, as mentioned, it is a mobility grant from the Economic Development Administration that's really meant to help the region navigate the transition to whatever is next in terms of mobility. So we're talking more than just automotive, we're talking all mobility sectors, as you're going to see in the output of the study itself. And we're talking about various technologies, right? Because what do we mean by transition? It doesn't just mean electrification, it means automation, it means supporting software expertise and so on. So essentially, we are working to help various entities in the region towards the goal of capitalizing on the transformation that is happening in mobility right now. And how that is taking place is, really summed up here. There are 6 pillars. Gem Central, where I work, is right at the top, which is kind of the coalescing body of this whole effort. But then you'll see, I think, hopefully, many of the buckets that are necessary to make this kind of thing happen. SEMCA is helping us run the talent pillar. Obviously, nothing happens without the right people. Locally, TechTown helping us run the main pillar, so startup innovation and working with startup companies. OFME at the state, proving and testing pillar, so helping companies have access to equipment and labs and processes and procedures that are necessary for their products to be ready for the future. For the companies that need some help transitioning from older products to newer products, whether that be electrified or otherwise, we're working with the Economic Growth Institute at U of M, and they are specifically tasked to do that along with MMTC. And then finally, within DRP itself, a site program called VIP, or Verified Industrial Properties. Hopefully all of this activity results in new investment or expansions, and we want to have the capability to help the companies there. So that being the case, why does this effort need a research guy like me? And that is to provide the insights and the guidance and the data that helps all of this happen in an optimized fashion. And that also means knowing, okay, what are the technologies that this region needs to prepare for and embrace? And essentially all that work that I just described needs to happen to support. And so to do that, we worked with S&P Global Mobility, with Michael Robinette. There, I know many of you know him, and they just did a fabulous job on this work. And it is a large, complex beast, and we can only scratch the surface in a conversation like this, but hopefully I've chosen the right content to really kind of make it all come home and register, and we'd be glad to interact with you for whatever supporting information you may need. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, a few thoughts. One, timing-wise, very specifically want you to know, study was completed in September of last year, and we're out kind of sharing the results right now. The forecasts upon which it is built, on many of these slides, you're going to see July 2024. There are a couple of them that were pulled from April, but the point there being that, as you all know, there has been a little bit of a pullback in terms of investment and rate of electrification. And for the most part, those trends started in 2023. So the reason I highlight this timing is to let you know that some of that slowdown, not some, but hopefully all of that slowdown, was already built into the forecasts when that study was completed. So that the timing is still, reflecting of the accurate thinking at the time. And yes, we did incorporate that perceived and actually in some cases very real slowdown into the forecasts. However, some things have happened since then, specifically in the last few weeks with the Trump administration. So, obviously the trade actions and the executive order actions are all still kind of coming out in fairly rapid succession. Some of them are specifically aimed at different mobility sector technologies like electrification. Some of them have the potential for economic disruption. Some of them have the potential for increasing the cost of inputs like steel and aluminum tariffs. And so just a note to let you know, yes, we are monitoring all of them. I've actually got a document for how we believe they're impacting these various technologies. So we're being very conscientious about the awareness of what these developments may change. And we are planning update efforts as the year goes on. And we will see, that could take the place, that could take the form of another large forecast study. It could also take the form of small, regularly occurring forecast updates that we just kind of go forth over time. But the point being that the intent, the knowledge of this being necessary is very much there. And we do have a plan and a budget to make sure that that happens, to make sure that this information stays relevant and still reflective of what the real reality is on the ground. Okay, so first of all, what is it that we did? We wanted a study that looks at future technologies, but not too far out in the future, right? Not the things that are, going to be 10, 20, 30, well, not 10, but 20, 30 years from now. That is fantastic information. It's very important. But we wanted things that are a little bit closer in time frame so that our entities can already be making decisions, making investments, guiding their work to meet those technologies. It had to have fairly short-term actionable needs for our work, therefore that 5 to 7 year timeline. The idea is to do all of the good things that you see listed here, and I'll just walk you really quickly through the process because many of you were a part of that process. But what we did is we identified 30 or 40 technologies to start with. We winnowed that down to about a dozen, and then we held a series of convenings with the GEM pillars themselves, with local economic development and government organizations and others, to winnow that list down to the 7 that you will see analyzed here. We also then did a final convening with automakers and suppliers as a pressure check to make sure, are we being realistic in our selections, and are these technologies that you would recommend that we select for the deep dives? And after that industry pressure check, the work was done. And the work that you will see here is an output of that work. First of all, setting a little bit of context here, you have a July of last year forecast for global electrification trends. And you'll see the US expected to grow rapidly. We shall see whether these numbers actually match this rate, because the forecast is always the best available knowledge at the time. And obviously times have been a little bit dynamic the last few weeks here. But best available thinking. However, it's not necessarily the exact number that applies. It's the direction and the relevant scale of the numbers to each other. So despite the rapid advancement of electrification in the United States, you'll see our numbers are not as high as Europe and China. And so essentially, there is a balancing act between what is realistic, what is less or more painful to transition to, but also we don't want to get too far behind the lead in terms of Europe and China, because we essentially then risk being a place where the technologies are manufactured, but the thought leadership doesn't exist, whether it's about the deployment or the actual development of these technologies, or coming up with whatever technology it is that comes next. So, excuse me. So there is a sweet spot between, the leading edge and the bleeding edge. So sorry, and market reality. And that is very much a puzzle that we have to solve. Okay. So let's just get right into the data here. And what I've got is we're starting with the things that I believe are most relevant. And then also we sort of start broader and work our way a little bit more focused as we go. So here we start with North American battery electric vehicle production in the 3 mobility sectors that I believed are most appropriate for the region. So light vehicle, medium heavy duty vehicle, and bus. And you will see a fairly steady but advancing volume production of these vehicles in the region. And these are, again, already BEVs. So when we think about, and by the region here being North America, but in the Detroit region, these are obviously the mobility sectors to which we have the greatest ties. So what that tells us is, what we call the TAM, T-A-M, total addressable market, is rapidly growing for, these technologies to have vehicles to be put into, right? And so we start, big picture, North American BEV production, and then we get just a little bit more specific and a little bit more detailed. And hopefully there's a little story that can take place by going from left to right here. Because on the left, we now switch from North American to US production of light vehicles. So those are the cars and pickup trucks that you would normally buy at a dealership. And what you'll see is the total volume there in gray does rise through 2030, but not very much, right? It's relatively flat despite the slight positive trend. Where you do see a whole lot of positive growth is that orange column, which is the United States BEV or battery electric vehicle production. And again, this is among light vehicles, traditional cars and trucks. So those are high volumes because as you'll look at that legend, 12 million is the top of the scale. Contrasts a little bit with what you see on the right-hand side, which is BEV production in excuse me, in the United States, but this time we're talking about non-light vehicle. So all those other mobility sectors that you're going to see outlined here in a second. And what you'll see is both the total vehicle is somewhat flat, but rising faster than the BEV side on the light vehicles that you just saw, but also the non-automotive BEVs. You know, yes, there is growth there, but the volumes stay pretty low, right? If you look at that scale, you know, the first bar is only 500,000 units. So we are talking about fairly low volumes. However, here is the concept. We believe that it is actually a fantastic strategy for the Detroit region and a great development that these technologies take root in our core mobility sector first, right? That means that by being a place where we develop and support these technologies for that mobility sector first, when these technologies are adapted at high volumes in the other mobility sectors, our region will be ready. You know, that means we're doing our homework up front to be a better host for the non-automotive mobility sectors, and that seems to be a very, very sound strategy to play out. And so, you know, as stated earlier, here is that breakout of those non-automotive, those non-light vehicle mobility sectors. You know, and among them, you've got the medium and heavy duty vehicle that I mentioned, construction and agriculture, aerospace, maritime, and first and last mile, which are essentially delivery drones. And you do see a positive growth there for the sectors. And again, very different production volumes than we normally see in light vehicle. But again, you can't apply that same yardstick. And I'll have some implication slides on some of the meaning of these facts here toward the end, including employment. Okay, so here they are. Here are the 7 technologies that we have talked about. 5 of them can be considered propulsion technologies. And by that we mean, of course, the bread and butter of what's in an electric vehicle, batteries and electric motors, then power electronics, which is essentially what's between the plug and the battery, and then the battery and the motors. Thermal efficiency, so we're talking cooling and heating of the battery, but also different vehicle systems. On the hydrogen side, there is internal combustion engine hydrogen technology, which we are looking at, which is also significant for the city. But in this study, we're focused specifically on fuel cell, which is essentially using a chemical reaction to convert water and to convert hydrogen into water and oxygen and generate electricity as a byproduct and drive the vehicle forward. So those are the propulsion technologies. But we also have 2 sort of adjacent technologies. One is on the software side, and obviously software is all throughout these technologies. In this case, we're specifically talking about software-defined vehicles, cybersecurity, and over-the-air updates, and then assembly automation, which is critical to the region. It's the most broad of these technologies because it also has applications, obviously, for all manufacturing and not just transportation or mobility manufacturing. Okay, so some results summarized here for you. When we talk about these specific technologies, the ones that are related to powertrain, you know, here you see annual growth rate from now to 2030, all very large, powerful numbers. You do see some very large numbers on the fuel cell side, but that's partially because they start at such small volume levels that it doesn't take a big numerical shift to give you a large percentage change. But throughout that period, you know, and this is an annual rate, you see robust growth in all of these technologies. And then you've also got the production slide there on the right. But narrowing it down even further, here is a Michigan look at the light vehicle BEVs. And yes, you can see that we do very much capitalize on this trend of growth in these in this particular vehicle type. And really robust. We don't see a whole lot of leveling off here in terms of, is kind of the growth phase truly behind us? It is definitely not, and you can see that reflected here on that chart. And then when we look at those other mobility sectors, kind of all together, you see that really strong trend as well. That line there in orange is the BEV penetration rate, which is the presence of these technologies in these vehicles. And again, rising very, very rapidly. And I won't read necessarily every bullet point here for you, but you can see, I think, how powerful that trend is. Now, a few thoughts on some of our other technologies. In this case, it's that software-defined vehicle, cybersecurity, and over-the-air category of software. And again, everything that we are talking about here is run by software. So there's an underlying trend there, and these were specifically called out as areas of particular opportunity. Now, they are all significantly more applicable to electric vehicles than they are to conventional ICE or internal combustion engine powered vehicles. When you no longer have an engine and a traditional fuel and exhaust system, you have essentially the ability to run everything electrically, and it means making on-the-fly changes and demands. And so you can essentially have a vehicle that feels and drives very differently because you could change the feel and the effort and the effectiveness of the gas pedal, the brake pedal, the steering, the suspension, how firm the ride is, all of those things. And that's software-defined vehicle where you actually feel like you're driving a different car based on how you set the software to run it. Cybersecurity speaks for itself. Increasingly a growing concern, both in the vehicles, the charging infrastructure, you name it. Definitely a critical area. And then over-the-air updates. With so much software on the vehicle, quite often the recall, the service requirement is a software-based one. And now we have the capability to do that, as stated, over the air without needing to take that vehicle into a dealership to have that software flashed through some kind of physical content. It can now just be pulled down off the cloud. So very powerful technologies and very much expected to be in the forefront of the future. And here, just to kind of bring it all home, the spend expected in the software development by propulsion type. And you can see that we're in the waning years of internal combustion software. Hybrid is going to level off, but a very strong growth trend there planned for the electric vehicles. Assembly automation, so there we're talking about Industry 4.0, but also adjacent supported technologies. It has both a software and a hardware component to it. And we're going to leave you with this slide. By no means do I plan on reading it, but you will all have access to these slides. But basically, it is a case of supporting the region's ability to be a good host for all of these mobility sectors. But also, if you are good at this, you become really good at a whole bunch of things that matter to a whole bunch of industries. So, if you look at assembly automation and the necessary building blocks, the elements that are there, tell me if any of this rings home as hot stuff recently. Internet of Things, cloud computing, cybersecurity, all of this. If the region becomes really good at doing this for initially the purpose of assembly automation, this will also make us really competitive in a whole host of other sectors as well. And so it's the fabulous spin-off effect of doing things that have that kind of potential. Now, talk a little bit about employment. We're going to talk about it two different ways. One is a little bit more on the automotive side, and then another is everything else. On the automotive side, here we have a slide where we just talk about the automakers and at the Michigan level. So yes, There is potential for job growth by 2030. In orange, that BEV category goes from 8,000 people working there to 26,000 people working there. Similarly, when we add suppliers to the analysis, so now it's both automakers and suppliers. The number goes from 11,000 to 44,000. And also at the Michigan levels, so still a slight job growth. But here's the thing, that BEV growth, those are new jobs. And they don't necessarily come to Michigan. They don't necessarily come to the Detroit region unless we are ready for them and we do all the work that we need to be a good host for those technologies. And then separately, excuse me, on the non-automotive mobility sectors, in short, we estimated in the study about 21,000 direct jobs coming as a result of the growth in these sectors. Conservative number, if Michigan got only 10% of that, that would be 2,100 jobs. No, it isn't on the same scale as the automotive that we just talked about. However, keep in mind, that this is just through 2030. If we play a good host to these entities from these mobility sectors, if we help them set up shop in the region, then we can be there when they go really high volume, hopefully post 2030, and we're setting the region up for to be a place that can really host that kind of growth. And then final thought, we have some challenges, capacity utilization, and now we're talking about balancing different powertrain paradigms and different technologies in that already struggling capacity utilization situation. We have a lot of uncertainty, both in terms of total electrification trends, but also some of these presidential actions because they directly tie to electric vehicle and other programs. We need to keep an eye on those and study their impact. And then finally, all these transformative elements have different effects on automakers and suppliers versus dealers. There's a whole conversation to be had there, but the suppliers are very much volume dependent. So, high profits at low volume are possible for automakers and dealers, tougher for suppliers. And so we have to keep an eye on how that resonates within the region. And so with that brings me to the end of my prepared comments. I want to give Glenn appropriate time to wrap up. But as mentioned, this is my contact info here in the presentation. And at this point, I'd be happy to take any questions. So please take it away again, Glenn.
Bernard, why don't you leave that slide up with your contact information while I wrap it up?
Of course.
If you would, please. And we will, as Bernard mentioned, get this information to you. So let me wrap it up to keep us on time. Thank you, Bernard. I had seen this data presented before. As Bernard mentioned prior to the call, he's done a lot of work to package it and repackage it. I know some of you have questions, and please reach out to Bernard. He's a tremendous resource, and I know we'll get back to you. But I guess I'll just say this, I think you made a really key comment, Bernard, unless we are ready for them. So these are technologies that are going to drive growth somewhere, and it should be here. But we need to be ready for them. And that means talent. That means economic development. That means the political leaders. And of course, everything's driven by corporate. The other thing is I think you point out, we need to leverage our assets. You can't be what you can't be, but you can leverage your assets. And one of the things I frequently say is, I don't like the expression, well, we need to diversify away from automotive. And I would say, no, we need to double and triple down on automotive and use the technologies that are in it to develop ancillary industries and growth. And I think that this study really points that out. Thank you for tying it to economic development and employment, because that's at the end of the day what drives growth, certainly on the population side too. So thank you very much, Bernard, today. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Again, our quarterly briefings will keep happening quarterly. If you have a topic or an idea that you think you'd like us to find one of our thought leaders and present on, shoot Lauren or Lori or myself or Drew a note and say, hey, I'd really like to hear about this next quarter. But for now, Bernard and everybody, have a great day today. And thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
And thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Glenn and team.